Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast today. I'm really excited to be here together with Ari Wisner. Welcome to the podcast, Ari.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I've really been looking forward to it.
I've been also looking forward to this. We met a few months ago in London, and I've been so excited and happy for you to just share your work and your magic with us through your Transient Light Tarot that you've created, tarot deck, and I have it right here. It's so beautiful and so like soothing in a way, like really grounding when I look at this beautiful deck. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about your journey, about the tarot. Maybe some of the listeners haven't really understood the whole structure and where the tarot came from, but also how we can work with the tarot and what the purpose is. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about all of this.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic, and I came to tarot only, well, I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's been quite a whirlwind journey, like into something that was totally alien to me before. But I believe it's really very, very powerful, and I think more people could find it useful than I think they realize.
Yeah, definitely. And anyone can use it. It's not that some people are able to use this, because it's really a tool like any other tool for spiritual growth, for your inner growth, personal development, guidance, and to be very aware. So I'm really excited, and you're an amazing artist. Maybe you can start by sharing your journey into how you started creating art and also how that came into your spiritual evolution as well.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I mean, from a young age, I was always wanted to be an artist. That was my dream. But there was a definite disconnect between my love of painting and drawing and it being something that was a viable career. I wasn't really encouraged that was something that I could make a living with, and it was certainly something that I hadn't connected at all spiritually. It was just a personal therapy to me, I guess. So the art that I was creating until sort of my late teens was just a reflection of teen angst and the things that I was experiencing and feeling, and then I kind of put my creativity on hold from about the age of 17 until maybe the age of 25. There was a big chunk where I wasn't painting regularly, I wasn't drawing, and I was working as a graphic designer. But the disconnect was like I was very, very religious, from a young age, right till I was about 26. And so the art, it was a disconnect because the belief system that I was in, that I believed in, I wasn't connecting to. So the belief system that I had kind of discouraged me from exploring myself or my uniqueness or my queerness. And so I kind of felt like art was a self-indulgent thing that like wasn't important. Which is funny because the full circle story is that it turns out that it's one of the most precious things that I have and that I'm blessed with, and it is deeply connected with my spirit and how I connect with other people. So I got in touch with my creativity again in 2015. I was disfellowshipped from the church that I belonged to, and I'd separated with a spouse, which was not acceptable in that church. So everything had kind of been thrown into a whirlwind, and everything I thought I knew wasn't true. My faith was falling to pieces, and I lost a lot of family and some friends, and more friends than family. But I ended up just turning to art as therapy, in particular, actually poetry, rather than visual art, because it'd been so long since I had been making visual art, it was too intimidating. So I actually started by just writing a lot and very therapeutic. And when I moved to London, I started going to a lot of poetry events, which is how I met Fausta, who wrote the poetry for the guidebook of the Transient Light. And I started painting and creating again, maybe 2018 onwards. And for the first time ever, I was making it just for me. Like, it wasn't for to sell. It wasn't because I was going to be an artist. It was just about me processing and expressing the divine. I was obsessed with the divine. I think in many ways I'd simplified my idea of the divine. You know, before it was this rigid structure in a religious context, and then suddenly the divine was something so much simpler, so much more connected, so much more circular and accessible. And I just started painting a lot of almost like meditative paintings, lots and lots of circles, lots of like central points and altars, and that was just for me pleasing myself. When the 2020 lockdown happened for COVID, by which point I'd been reading tarot for myself for a couple of years, that's when I thought, oh, I have time on my hands. I can't go out. I can't do the things I was doing before. I was living very fast. And that's when I started working on making my own tarot deck. And I made two. I started with the first one, the Trinity Tarot, and then I worked on the Transient Light Tarot. So that was the artistic kind of route that I got there. And it was interesting when I started making tarot, especially when I started self-publishing it, hearing people's feedback, people connecting with the artwork, people using the artwork in their own meditation, in their own prayers, their self-reflection, their decision-making, was just mind-blowing. You know, I wasn't making an artwork to just put on a wall, or it wasn't graphic design for a brand that I've been doing for years. It was spiritually connected, and that was deeply fulfilling. And I'm so honored that like people have responded to it, and that it's reached as many people as it has. I think I can't remember if I said to you, I think I said this to your messages earlier the other day. You know, you'd asked me how things have been after the launch of Transient Light, and like a couple of days after, I cried. And I don't cry very often, but I felt like I had let a child. I brought a child to the world, and they were off and they were adults now, because it was such a personal deck, but it was now something bigger, and it was something that was now belonging to many other people, which is lovely. But also it was very, very moving. So this deck, in particular, the Transient Light, which is my second deck, is definitely the first time my passion and like my personal spark, my own uniqueness, my own thing, has met with my spirituality and my connection to others as a wider universe that is all connected to the divine. It is the divine, you know, in one united loop, as it were. So what started off as just like an illustration project of my own for the joy of like delving deeper into the tarot, it became a huge spiritual journey for me, and completion as well for me. So yeah.
Wow, what an amazing and so just deep journey that you've been in, which I also didn't know about, because it sounds like you've done like a really strong spiritual evolution in this life, and I think many of us do in different ways, because it's not always very clear where we're going in our, when we're connected, like this connection that you've always had to the divine in one way, and then practicing it from like a structural religious point of view. It's kind of also like people who are not really how should I say this? Well, it's like you started to break out from that and having your own path into it, where we break free from this old paradigm of like this dual paradigm where things are good or bad and things have to be in one way to be accepted, and there's so much in that. So I'm really amazed by the journey that you've done. And how was that transition? And when you did you feel free to start exploring, like how did that happen for you to start exploring your spirituality after being more in a boxed way of spirituality?
It was quite a gradual process. I mean, I was feeling very disconnected before I was disfellowshipped from that church, but I was very comfortable. Like I was playing the role that was expected. I was ticking the boxes, obviously not perfectly, and yeah, when I was sort of forced out of that, it just put everything into question, and I started to realize how much everything I perceived had been decided for me, like all my ethics, all my morals, or, all my perspectives on the world had been dictated to me. None of them were made from my own intuition, and as a result, my intuition was very weak. Like I didn't know how to listen to my heart. I didn't know how to listen to my mind or my body or my spirit. I'd learned that spirituality was, here's the right book, follow it as closely as you can. I think it's a Hierophant, and that was very joyous, but also very scary. And because suddenly there was no, and I was quite vulnerable as well. I started going to a lot of more liberal like religions and churches, because at first I sort of didn't believe, at least the Christianity world, as broad as it is. And I came across quite a few characters on the way who were very ready to take advantage of my vulnerability and try to pull me into their way. Very charismatic people who sometimes did have a lot of power over me. So I spent a couple of years sort of going from one place to the next, and believing all sorts of different things. And that's where the tarot became quite useful, because I had a gap. I had no spiritual practice, no personal spiritual practice. And when I came across tarot, what I loved so much about it was it turned it on me. It wasn't a case of the tarot card says this, so it's law. It was, what is this drawing out of yourself? It's a bit like a mirror. It kind of, often it's so easy to hide things, especially if they're painful things like fear or worry, or when you don't want to confront something, it's quite easy to ignore it. But when someone holds up a tarot card that says it to you, you're like, yeah, I connect with that, So I felt, for me, getting into tarot was really empowering. It was my way of being alone in my room, my own practice, how I can be more in touch with my mind and my own power, which is definitely what I like to sort of promote with how I've made my tarot decks. Is, I'm not giving you a magical thing. I'm giving you something to bring out your magic. I'm giving you interpretations as a guide, but you need to reflect on it. This is yours. It's yours to reflect on, which is very powerful, because it was so personal to me. The images were very personal to me, but it's yours now. It's not mine anymore to dictate. Yeah, so it was quite tumultuous, but very, very rewarding and very empowering. And yeah, I'm so glad of that journey. So glad of that.
Yeah, that's an amazing journey. And to be like sometimes we do get these more tougher starts on our spiritual journey for a reason as well, to like it helps us to find our path. So it's not even I'm just thinking that, so yeah, sometimes we look at organized religion, and if it's very dogmatic, it's limiting. But if you're also like completely like infused in the material world and see like only the senses as the real like reality, and not having any connection, that's also a very dogmatic way of living. And a spiritual evolution can be similar then, when you start looking, but is the world really what people tell me it is, or how can I discover who I am in this, in my purpose?
That's such a good point. And I think at first I went out into the world like, the world is my oyster, there's so much to explore. And you do start to realize over time that everyone, I think it stems from this very human need for comfort. That's why they go for dogmatic, structures of belief, whether that's religious or worldly. Like, people are drawn to them because there's a certain level of security in, oh, this is truth, or this works, or this, if I follow this path, or if I do this, I will have a happy life. And I think life is a bit too fluid for that, and I've become very wary of like ever trying to define myself, or trying to define the divine, or trying to define a singular path. Even if I found a singular path for me, it's for me. It's not something that I can ever say is right for someone else. And that's where the power comes back to yourself. We're already connected to the whole universe and to all of the humans. That doesn't mean that we're all going to be the same. It's the diversity of humankind that is so special. That's how we learn from each other. So I did have some surprises on the way, like coming out of religion and being like, oh, okay, this isn't religion, but it's kind of like religion. I kind of found that coming out of the closet. I mean, I came out very late, like when I was 27. It was funny. I suddenly went from this religious culture to this very, in particular at that time, very male gay culture, which in itself is valid and good and healthy. But after a year or so being in that, it was like, oh, but I'm being defined again. I'm being put back into another like type. So yeah, the spiritual journey has also been very tied up with my journey of understanding my, sexuality and my gender and my body, my being in that sense, and that's all very tied up, with your spirit. So over lockdown, I got a lot of time by myself to also explore that and be like, why am I trying to put labels on who I am and how I am, when things are fluid and things grow and change, and no two people are the same. It's funny that it's a very human thing, that fear of a lack of structure or a lack of eternity, but then it's often in the guise of spirituality. Does that make sense? Like, people can believe a certain religious viewpoint, but it's fueled by fear, and that's the thing, isn't it? Whether you believe something, whether it's fueled by fear or whether it's fueled by just love, which is a lot more fluid and ready for change and accepting of endings and transience.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I feel like that's like the ultimate path, when we like stop the duality in one way. If you are always attached to like contrasts and things like that, because our senses perceive things like that, and even language can be so contrasting. I've shared previously, in my mother's tongue, Kurdish, we don't have gender labels at all, like no him or her, nothing. Yeah, so and so in that way, I've never heard like the divine being called him or her. So it's
Wow,
yeah, it's no like,
so lovely.
isn't that like language can make a big difference? And then, like you said, when you start stripping some labels off of you and not being tied down or boxed in, you can no longer like attach yourself to it either. There's no attachments, and that's also one of the spiritual paths, like releasing that attachment, and it's so liberating in so many ways.
Yeah, like, because we're all, I mean, I see us all as like temporary expressions of the divine. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to be on this planet in this physical form anyway for a certain amount of time. And in that time, I am just one expression of the divine. And that's the thing, is if you start boxing in the divine as, okay, the divine is a him and it functions like this,
Mm.
um, then no wonder you then have the expectation that humans should all reflect that one type.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's so lovely that for you the divine wasn't described as male or female, and like
Mm-hmm.
I find it really interesting when people don't personify the divine as well, because even that helps as well. That I think of the divine less as a being, but more of a force, or I think of love as divine. I think of
Mm-hmm.
creativity as divine. I think of intuition as divine. Like I think anything that is creative and building, death also is divine. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if we stop limiting the divine, we'll start to realize that all these different expressions of the divine are valid and beautiful. And yeah, that's
Exactly.
really
No, I
interesting.
love that. And also, like, for me, if I would say God or any, when I talk about the divine, I don't see any form with it. And it's really, like you say, it's everything and nothing. It just is, right? So
Mm,
when we come back to that, it also strips away all of these labels. And then I find it interesting to really research like old traditions. Like you said, we're so diverse. There's a meaning with why we are so diverse. There is, we are supposed to be diverse. Otherwise, I don't know, like that's what the contrast does. And like you said, instead of us like we are the image of God, maybe God is the image of us, and this diversity can become like an expression of everything, and then in every place in the world, like where there's diversity, it's good. Even biological diversity at a workplace, diversity in your mind. It's not really like healthy to be in very like non-diverse environments. What if you
mm.
would just eat one thing every day, or
Yeah.
like
I mean, it's been proven, hasn't it? It's been proven that in a business, for example,
yeah,
diversity encourages innovation and creativity. And
exactly.
and you were saying earlier, like, collaboration is so beautiful because you
Mm.
come out with things that you just never would do by yourself. And I think if I was to try and loosely define the divine, I often think of the word unity,
Mm.
because I think in many ways that is the thing that like is the end result of divine, of diversity. Like, humans are diverse, plants are diverse, animals are diverse, the weather is diverse, the planets are diverse,
Mm.
everything is diverse. And that's because I liked what you said about us being a reflection of the divine, but the divine being a reflection of earth, that it is all a loop. you know
Mm.
it's not, divine is not a separate thing that we have to like somehow connect to. We
Mm.
are part of it. We're
Yeah.
all part of it. And when we pass in this life, our energy, our spirit, our physical bodies, just, they don't go anywhere. They just go
Mm.
back into that cycle. And however you believe that works, that is what happens.
Mm.
Nothing leaves this universe. Everything stays. It just expresses into a different form, which is so lovely. It's so
Yeah.
lovely and comforting. Like, for me,
Mm.
that is what helps me get over the fear of not living forever, or the fear of what if there's not something after this. That recovers my fear. I'm like, no, I look forward to feeding the roots of the trees, or whatever I did in this life, living on in someone's memory, or whatever. Like, we are eternal. We are part of the eternal universe around us. And I think that's so encouraging. I wouldn't want anything else.
No, exactly.
I don't need anything else.
No, it's so beautiful. And also, like, when we look at a different perspective, when we start looking like up and down and around us, and the stars and the planets, and then like we're not really comprehending really where we are, because even now we don't know like how big it's, like eternal, this space that we're in. And when it came to, because I love studying mythology, and with my roots, I also study a lot of the Mesopotamian origins of different gods and goddesses, especially the goddesses. And when you look at that, and you look at how different civilizations have seen these beings, it's almost like these beings are actually not like what we think, like how we've expressed the god. It's actually beings that are somehow like connected to us, and they have manifested because they're so similar. I mean, how many times have you seen gods with like a human and an animal shape in different civilizations, or winged gods or goddesses, angels? So also, like, why did we stop connecting to that and these different forms? And even if it's just in a dream or just in a vision that we get, it doesn't mean that it's not real, because there's so many dimensions as well.
Yeah, and like I've never had much. I've not had much knowledge about mythology, but my boyfriend is like really into it. He's got every book there is, and it's lovely because he's always telling me these stories. Just out of the blue, he's telling me about this god or this myth, and it's fascinating because it often sounds like a soap opera. They're acting like humans, having relationships, or there's some sort of scandal. And what's so lovely about that as well, and it's sad that we don't connect with that anymore, is that, or not as much these days, is there's so much to be learned from it. These stories of these gods and their lives and what they did and such are very relatable, and they're full of wisdom. They're parables of how to live well. If you do this, then this might happen. The path of fear leads to this, the path of love leads to that. And there's so much wisdom in it, and it's such a shame when people try to strip out the humanity because they feel like that's not divine. It's like, no, the whole point of the divine is that it's merged with humanity. I kind of think of it as the divine as the spirit, and then humanity is like the vessel of it. And so therefore humans are playing out divinity in different ways, in very beautiful ways, and learning from each other. That is funny.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I'm actually really curious, because I love the name of the deck, Transient Light Tarot. What does that name mean to you? How did you channel that name, and what does it tell us about this deck?
Sure. So I didn't beat about the bush on the name. Like, I had the name in my head straight away, but it came from when I was sort of developing this broader view of the divine. I had this vision in my head for a couple of years, which is actually I actually included in the deck. It's the crown of vessels. I've got the image on my phone, and it's a skull. It's a skull. It's an earthly skull made of physical matter, and it's containing this beautiful free spirit, which in my head was blue. And I had this sort of title for this image, this vision that I had, and it was a temporary vessel of eternity. The idea that in this body that we're blessed with we are just a temporary vessel of something more eternal. And that was the lead for the deck. And originally I did actually use that in this self-published version. I used that image for the front cover. So the name just kind of came. I think I'd made maybe 8 cards, and I think someone asked like, "What are you going to call it?" And it was like, "It's going to be the Transient Light." In a way, it's almost like the Transient Life, but I felt like life was more appropriate because it's not that the life is transient; it's the life in this form. So I like this idea of this temporary vessel being a container of some kind of light that is borrowed and will do something else. That was the name, and that was kind of like the main theme, the grounding theme throughout the deck. Sort of vision I had throughout.
Yeah, I really love the name, and I'm actually sitting with the cards now. I really like the feeling of them. They're so beautiful, and with the animals as well. I love like animals give us so much beautiful messages just in their own. And one important thing is also that this is you remade. So maybe we can just talk briefly about the structure of tarot and like how the traditional tarot is, but also how you've remade the traditional tarot to I feel like this is really inclusive in so many ways. Do you want to share that? Because I think it would be interesting for people to understand that as well.
Sure. So a summary of the structure of the tarot is you have 72 cards, and there are 78 cards, and there's a minor arcana and a major arcana. The major arcana are sort of more overarching archetypes and themes of the journey of life. There's 22 of them, so they're the big things. So you have the Death card, you have the Empress, you have the Wheel of Fortune. You have those big themes, and then the rest of the deck is the minor arcana, which is split into 4 realms: the Swords, the Wands, the Cups, and the Pentacles. And these also correlate with the 4 elements. So you have the spirit, the mind, the heart, and the body. So those cards go into more for detail of those realms of your being. And so there's 14 cards for each of those realms, structured a bit like a set of playing cards. You know, you have 4 houses. So what I did with that, and what's so lovely about that structure and why so many people connect with it, is because it really does cover the whole human experience. Like every emotion, every kind of nuance can be found somehow in that structure. It's very, very comprehensive. And what I did with that structure was I found that there's a lot of traditionally gendered language and visuals. Often throughout history, we've used gendered language as like a shorthand for certain characteristics. So traditionally, it's like the masculine is structure and strength and so on. And the feminine energies are intuition and nurturing, and which is so limiting because none of those things are gendered, and or shouldn't be gendered. And so what I did is the cards that were gendered in name, I renamed, and I used imagery that 1 wasn't gendered, or 2 reduced the use of bodies so that it was more inclusive. So there are the use of hands, there's some silhouettes, but apart from that, and there's some eyes, there's quite a few eyes, but apart from that, it's a reduction of the use of the body and gendered language, which was really lovely because it was like, instead of thinking of, for example, the Empress is often thought of as like a mother card. It was interesting to a challenge to say, so how do I describe this without it being gendered? Like, what is a mother? When people say, oh, this is a mother card, but what is a mother? What is it different to a father? Like, what is a mother? And we called it the nurturer, and I used the oyster, you're developing a pearl, and that idea of taking something and layering it with nurture and because obviously that's how a pet's formed. It's actually an irritant at first, and it's like a more of a slow sitting with something and nurturing it into something very beautiful. And that was it was really fun to explore those and challenge, like, is this feminine or is this a label that isn't needed? Because we should all be able to relate to the nurturer, you know, whatever gender identity you identify as, you should be able to see yourself or aspire to be a nurturer. So I know there was quite a lot of gendering in the deck, so that was a really fun project.
Yeah, it really is, and you can see like that it's it's grown out of like all of these gender associations is a learned behavior. So it's really reflecting also maybe the time when, or we're still, I mean, we haven't come that far yet, to be honest,
Yeah.
but I mean, it really reflects that time. So now that we are in a new time to recreate that and having that, because we can have both qualities. I usually also like see myself having a lot of what my gender is not like the quality, like having this these qualities that maybe wouldn't be exactly in a tarot card labeled any feminine qualities, but I really relate to that, having that duality in yourself. And then all human beings are so different. We have different constitutions. You know, in Chinese medicine, we work with the elements and with the different qualities of the element, what that can lead to in your emotions and all of that. So it's much more when you go back to nature. We have all the yin and yang. We have all the elements in us, and then we are conditioned, and we can see that difference in different cultures. And I see that in my studies of sexual and reproductive health and rights that I just did my master's in, like how different societies, like how there's different gender roles and all of that. And then when you come to your spiritual work, it is a spiritual work to transcend that as well, even if you want to identify as like, and how do you again release that attachment and like, okay, everything that we observe in Vedanta, we say, is not the real or the real the everything. So if you can identify a character or a attribute or a quality that you have, it's not you can still have it and observe it, but it's not really what is behind that, and you go deeper and deeper. And and I love this this card I just drew. Maybe we can talk about this card, Keeper of the Sword, because it traditionally the keeper would be in tradition.
The queen, yeah. So like playing cards, you have court cards in the tarot, and so you have the page, the knight, the queen, and the king, and these are kind of like a progression of mastery. You know, the page is very much like a student, and I renamed it the apprentice. The knight is very much like a student who is ready to go and pursue, so I called it the champion. And then it came to the queen and the king, and suddenly there's this hierarchy of mastery where the queen is a very respected role, but it's not as mastered as the masculine role. But they're different roles. It's not about gender. So I renamed the queen the keeper and the king the crown. And with the keeper, so all four of the keeper cards, I used keys, which is one of my little personal symbols. And what I liked about this character, because the focus of this character as opposed to the crown is it's a bit more interpersonal. I find it's a bit more using the traditional feminine. It's a nurturer, and it's one that has really started to master the incoming and outcoming of their realm. And for example, the swords is the realm of the mind, of the intellect, of the insight. So this is a character who has developed the keys to like the incoming and outgoing of information. It's very insightful, this character. Someone who's in the know and is picking up on things, and it's very wise and good at sharing that wisdom, but also very good at receiving wisdom. And I just feel that that's so much more useful to think of this as a keeper than just a queen that doesn't really describe anything about that character. So yeah, I have 4 keys, and whereas the crown is more, it has the same qualities, but it's a bit more broader in terms of authority and being a leader in that realm, and also having more of a legacy of impact. Again, that shouldn't be assigned to a gender.
Yeah. And because, yeah, these roles and these titles are also not as relatable as that time. If it was in the medieval time that these, the queen and king doesn't say so much to us anymore. Like maybe in fairy tales and things like that, but it's not really relatable in that way. So I love that, how you restructured that, and the meaning, and everyone can relate also when you're working with an inclusive deck like this, which is more symbols and material things that are not connected to people. It also takes you away from that, the character, that the biases that we might have as well. So I really love that. And for people who have never worked with tarot, what do you suggest? Like how was your first like encounter with it, and how do you suggest that people start with it?
Good question. So I think my gateway to tarot, so when I came to it, I was in need of this kind of tool, but I had a lot of barriers in terms of I had a lot of superstition, obviously growing up religious. I thought tarot was something evil or but I was also drawn to it because I'm very visual, and I would see them on films and stuff and think, oh. So how my gateway was, I was actually at a festival, and there was a workshop by this lovely duo called Lit Witcher, these 2 lovely ladies who practice secular tarot, as they would call it. And my ears perked up because they were using tarot but had withdrawn it from any kind of connecting with spirits, fortune telling, that kind of thing. And that kind of gave me permission to be like, okay, I can just use it as a tool. I don't know what I believe. I don't know where I stand with the divine, but I know I need a tool, and this can work. So I was introduced at that workshop. I bought a deck and I just started reading for myself, and reading descriptions online and various books and such. But I found that was a really lovely gateway. And my tarot practice has developed since, and I still use it in quite a secular way, but I don't close my mind to the idea that spirit or the divine can work through it, like I think it does, because as we said, the world is everywhere and everything. So I think I don't like to pinpoint how it works or why it works. I just know that it's very useful. I just know that it's very useful, and I think whatever belief system you have, you can find a way of connecting the tarot to it. I think you could use it as a Christian. I know you can. I know Christians who use the tarot. Whatever belief system or faith you have, I think you can find it useful. But in terms of direction, like, I think the best way to get started with tarot is getting hold of the deck and using it yourself. I'm not putting too much pressure on yourself to read to other people or read it word for word. These aren't, they're for you to reflect on, rather than to tell you what you're feeling or what you're experiencing, or tell you what you will experience. Spend time alone with it, and there's so many resources to help you get started. I used Biddy Tarot. If you Google for lots of Googling, when you Google a definition for a card, you often it goes straight to her website. She's got some brilliant research there, and so I found that very, very useful in that journey. And actually, Lit Witcher, the 2 girls that I mentioned earlier, they've actually just released a book called Wildcard, which is a lovely introduction to tarot. just got my copy actually somewhere, and it's a really great introduction. It does go through card by card, but it's very practical, like in terms of applying it to your modern day life. And it's beautifully written, so I definitely recommend that as well. It's just called Wild Card. I recommend that if you're more of a book person than a Google person.
Yeah, that's such a good idea. And also I can share like how I started working with it as well, because I was gifted a deck years ago before I barely knew what it was, and then I got very interested, and I thought, well, I want to understand and charge the cards in one way. So I started like card by card. I think I started writing down some keywords for each card, like listening to something about them, and then reading the book that it came with. It's and then writing something down about it. And then when I started also using it more and more for myself and my friends, and then you start seeing the patterns. And I really, really enjoy, I work particularly a lot with angel tarot, actually, because I connected with that energy as well many years ago. So it's so accurate, and every card has its own, or every card deck has its own qualities that you can apply. I feel like they speak to you in different ways, and can like, I've never stuck to only one deck, even if I have one that I've used a lot. But I really love, so I was so happy to have this, your deck actually, because it's going to be interesting to see what this deck wants to communicate to me in this aspect of my life. And I'm really so excited for you that you released this. And I also just want to say, because an interesting thing that you mentioned, just that some things became forbidden in certain times. I really see that in Christianity, not so much in Islam in that way, in my experience from my own. There's more mysteries in it. So divination is not really, like what I've seen at least, not anything evil. And then I'm thinking, if we say that God creates everything, then why would, like, we're not creating anything really. We're just manifesting whatever the divine is coming through us, because we're also divine. Because there's also this stigma around certain things, as we see in the world right now. And how can certain technologies and things that do benefit people be something bad or evil? Or if you're using cards, which is maybe your intention is only for your and the other person's highest and greatest good, isn't that what we should be practicing, instead of saying something is right or wrong all the time? You don't have, of course, if you're doing things to hurt other people, it's obvious it's not a good action. But like items and things shouldn't determine, like, if you're a good Christian or good whatever. Like, I don't know, I don't understand that mentality really.
100%. Like, it's the spirit of which you do something. Like, you can almost make anything evil if you have bad intentions for it. You know, of course someone can use tarot in a very destructive or exploitative way, but people can also use it in a very powerful, beautiful way. And it's that's the same for any kind of holy book. That's the same for any kind of political viewpoint or belief. Like, anything can be taken too far one way or the other. It kind of comes back to that whole sort of yin yang, the sort of, you know, exactly. There are always two sides, and the idea is to sort of navigate with wisdom and collecting wisdom through that, and make sure that what you're doing, the intentions behind it, the spirit behind it, is good. You know, and it's not something to be afraid of. You know, there's some scary looking cards in the tarot. You know, there's a death card, there's a devil card, there's the tower, but these aren't things to be afraid of, because there's good and bad inevitable in all of our lives, in all of us. And they're things that actually, the better you understand it, the better you can manage it and learn from it, rather than hiding from it.
Yeah.
I even today I drew the death card, which was interesting because I was reading an article for Libras the other day, and it was like, you really need to embrace the death card, and I was like, I know, and then I picked it today. I was like, I know.
It's reminding
funny how
you.
cards repeat themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Useful. That's quite an important thing at the moment in this point in my life, is I really do need to sort of accept the slowing down and the ending of, after this being released, like an ending of one chapter and the opening of the next chapter, which I don't necessarily know what that is yet. So it's really powerful. It's I find it's a nice way for the universe to give you negative, like, it's not the right word, but perceived negative things in a very kind way that you can prepare for them. You know, that's part of embracing transience. It's embracing the idea that everything that comes, you can't control what comes into your life, but you can control how you react to it. And to a certain level, what you invite in and out. Obviously not everything, but you can, to a certain level, influence what comes in and out of your life. So I think the tarot is very powerful in that preparation for the unknown. For sure.
Definitely. And I love that. I actually, when I received this beautiful deck, I had received the death card as well, and it's. I mean, death is like the physical death is a. What if everything would only grow and not die? What if the trees would never die, or like everything has to be in cycles, or we can't have like constant night or constant day. So the death card, maybe people associated with the fear of physical death, but then you have to, in any fear, you have to ask yourself, why do you have that fear? Why are you fearing something that you cannot control? Because probably it is the lack of wanting to release control. And the death card is so important to just, if you it kind of can test your, like, when you say that you believe in something, but then you're really afraid. Let's say you believe in God and all of that, and then you're afraid of death. But why? Because if it's all meant to be like this, we cannot change it. And then, like you said, an ending of a chapter is important. We can't just go on and on in one chapter. What if you would read a book that would never end, or like it? So the death card is really beautiful.
It's the perspective of, like, death is just as important and beautiful as birth. Neither of us chose to be born. That was out of our hands. Same with death. That's out of our hands. And if we take a step back and look at that, it's like, well, every moment that we are breathing is undeserved and unearned. So in a way, who am I to fear death? Like, in that sense, I deserve death. Deserve is not the right word, but you know what I mean. Like, it's imminent. It will happen, whether that's in a couple of hours or 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The point is every moment is precious. And as cheesy as that sounds to say, it is. And in that sense, I don't fear death. I might fear pain, but it all balances out. It's all part of the journey, and everything is bonus. The fact that we're alive now is a bonus. So there's nothing really to fear there.
No, and I think that if you look at like near-death experiences shared, like the stories, it doesn't seem like it's a bad thing, because people usually don't want to come back here when they have that oneness again. So yeah, just keep reminding us, and that's also part of the conditioning. And also maybe because we have been conditioned in the collective mind that something bad can happen after death, right? So we have that as well, which is, we need to like uncondition, because
yes, 100%. Which in a way, like, it doesn't make sense that this one life that we're living now is somehow the decider of eternity. Like, again, perspective, step away from sort of micro that we're in and step up to the macro. No, like, this is one expression, and we don't need to fear what's next, just as we don't worry or fear about what came before. Like,
Exactly.
That's not important. That's not
No,
important.
exactly.
What we do now is important.
Yeah. Well, Ari, it was, I think we could talk about these things for hours. And
I
I
know.
hope that
I
we
love
do
it.
talk again on the podcast, because we have a lot of things that we really could discuss. And I want to ask you, where can people find this beautiful deck if they feel pulled now to start working with the tarot?
Sure. So you can get it through Amazon, the Book Depository, Waterstones, other bookstores online and offline. Or I do have signed copies from my website, ariwisner.com. And yeah, so
Amazing.
whichever route is useful for you.
Yeah, I can really recommend it, and I will definitely do a reading on Instagram as well with these cards, because I feel that they're so magical, and yeah, you've done an amazing job. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing today. And is there anything else you want to share before we close?
I don't think so. I've really enjoyed it. This has been really, really lovely. I'm so pleased.
Yeah.
I'm really thankful that you invite me on. Yeah, I hope that we do again.
Yes, hope to talk to you soon, and thank you so much again.
Thank you. Take care, Shireen.
Take care.